The Sultai Arisen deck is the perfect deck for someone who likes graveyard stuff, like me, but with unique, new flavors. It's got an incredible mill package straight out of the box, plenty of payoffs for lands entering the battlefield, great recursion options, and 10 new cards you've never seen before. With this upgrade, the game plan of this deck is to fill our graveyard using mill, then use our commander Teval the Balanced Scale to ramp using their land-based graveyard recursion. While zombies are a part of Teval's abilities, this is not a zombie deck. This is a rampy graveyard deck that feels buttery smooth to pilot, and I think anyone who buys this deck will be enamored by what it's capable of. The goal of this upgrade is to shore up some weaknesses around card draw and removal, upgrade our mill package and cut weaknesses, and increase our land-based payoffs, all while doing it for less than $50. There are 10 new cards in each precon, and the cards in the Sultai Arisen deck are some of the most exciting in the set. Let's kick this off by looking at the face commander, Teval the Balanced Scale. Ordinarily, I'd be worried about having a commander with an attack trigger, but Teval's inherent evasion with flying makes that almost a non-issue. This deck is all about getting stuff, primarily lands, out of your graveyard and onto the battlefield, giving you access to way more mana than you'd have through ordinary ramping methods. The backup commander is Kotis Sibsig Champion, and he takes this deck in a more Voltron direction, similar to Elsha in the Jeskai deck. Many of the Sultai cards from the main set transfer various counters if you exile them from the graveyard, so you can see how Kotis is being supported. You'd need to rebuild this precon if that's the direction you want to take it, but I could see it being a lethal deck more akin to playing an assassin at the table. Floral Evoker grows stronger whenever you play a land, and can even facilitate that itself with an added Teval trigger on top. The +1/+1 counters are pretty inconsequential, but if left alone long enough, it can certainly become a threat. Steward of the Harvest gives you a Teval trigger and turns all of your creatures into mana dorks. Unless you use some spicy utility lands, in which case they become hotspots for extra utility on the board. Very cool card, and you're going to have to think about the lands you've got in this deck that can really facilitate her ability. Diviner of Mist is not only an awesome dragon, it's also incredibly potent. Milling 4 cards per attack is already pretty good, but getting a free spell and a Teval trigger makes this card an incredible value engine. This deck isn't great about using instants and sorceries in the graveyard, but this card single-handedly changes that if it's on the board. In my opinion, this is the coolest card in the deck. Colossal Grave Reaver, which, what a name, serves as a static graveyard recursion engine. At 8 mana, it's a hefty cost to get it onto the battlefield, but this deck is great at hitting that threshold ahead of time, or cheating stuff out for free. Easily the MVP of this deck in my eyes, just a 10 out of 10. Modal cards are some of my favorite in Commander, and Teval's Judgment is a great example of why. Card advantage, extra ramp, or a body on the battlefield, and you get to pick all 3 if you can get enough triggers each turn. Draw 2, discard 1, and lose 2 life isn't great for 4 mana until you keep reading the rest of this card. Welcome the Dead can build you an army at the blink of an eye if you have a big turn of milling. There are lots of ways this card can be good, especially with flashback pinned on here. Afterlife from the Loam steals your opponent's best creatures from their graveyard, potentially for only 3 mana and a Teval trigger. Don't underestimate the power of Delve, but be careful you don't exhaust your graveyard to use it. Will of the Sultai is either the best ramp card in this deck, or the win condition you need to nuke someone out of the game. I just finished talking about modal spells, and this one is a powerhouse. Now that we've looked at the 10 newest cards from the set, let's take a look at the 10 cards I added to streamline this deck. I'm less worried about playing 2 lands per turn and more wanted the card draw AC provides. I also wanted to add a big hitter into this deck that can capitalize on the ample ramp in the deck, synergizing with that game plan even further. One thing this deck sorely lacks is interaction. While you're more focused on getting ahead and being the biggest problem on the board, I do want more options to deal with threats at instant speed, and Bitter Triumph fits the bill. This is one of my favorite cards in black, especially in decks that care about the graveyard so much like this one does. I've never encountered a moment where Incarnation Technique felt lackluster after casting it. There are very few cards that interact with 10% of your deck for only 5 mana, and this even has added recursion on top for some Teval triggers. It's absolutely worth the price tag. I like the idea of adding landfall payoffs, and Iridescent Vine Lasher can quietly put someone into the red zone if you cast it early. Doubling up on those triggers with Offspring just means this card retains its value even if you aren't casting it on turn 1. In theme with that landfall idea, Mossborn Hydra makes a threat for people to worry about other than Teval. Fully committing to landfall would take this deck into a bit of a different direction, but in playtesting I found it's really not hard to get value from these cards splashing them in. Primeval Bounty feels a little bit win more, but it gives us something to dump mana mana into that will continue to generate value whenever you take a game action. I liked it for the modality and wide range of utility. Card draw and mill are kind of synonymous in this deck, but it is sorely lacking in the former category. I wanted to stabilize that a bit, and Sivrus can do both. Low-key, this is kind of a sleeper of the best 10 added to this list. Take a look at the Sultai Fallout Precon for inspiration, because you could practically swap the 99s between these two and it'd still function well. Rad counters would work well in this deck, but Teval Farmer helps get extra lands out of the graveyard if it's starting to flood. If you've watched my videos before, you know how much I love Tomb Fortress and its more expensive cousin, Takenuma Abandoned Mire. With how many lands we're going to have, exiling this one on a later turn really doesn't feel that bad, especially if you need the recursion for something like Colossal Grave Reaver. Modality. With mill and a Teval trigger, removal, weaker removal, don't pick option 3, or a little bit of life gain, you're most likely picking between the first two every time you play Wither Bloom Command, but who knows. Maybe there's some super niche scenario where you need 2 extra damage to kill someone and it'll come in clutch. And I'd be remiss if I didn't at least mention this card. Crucible of Worlds is 25 at its cheapest and would have eaten into my $50 budget, but it would definitely make a big impact in this deck if you want to shell out for it. Cutting 10 cards from this deck wasn't particularly hard, which is kinda nice because it makes finding room for your pocket picks much easier. Let's take a look at the stuff I cut. My favorite Magic card! I'm all for more people playing Junji. Unfortunately, I'd recommend you cut it from this deck. Check out my Revaz of the Claw video at the end of this to see how you can make a deck that's perfect for Junji to slot into. In this one, I just don't think there's enough opportunity to sack Junji and recur it and do that lots of times. While I may love modal spells, Casualties of War is 6 mana, and it really doesn't do that much for how expensive it is. There are board wipes that have a better rate. We're not trying to mill our opponents out, so consuming Aberration is just redundant. We've also got plenty of ramp in this deck, and Cultivate doesn't help us get Teval out early. I'm cutting this to make room for stuff that synergizes just a little bit better. Lord of the Forsaken, while cool and decent on paper, really doesn't fit the theme of this deck. This isn't Aristocrats, and it's not trying to mill out opponents. But that first ability isn't entirely bad. However, we don't have much that can get itself out of the graveyard, so that latter ability is almost useless. There are better board wipe into recursion cards in this deck than Necromantic Selection. It's not the worst, just a bit overcosted at 7 mana when something like Living Death already exists in the deck. I really don't like the idea of exiling cards from our graveyard in this deck. It's pretty good at recursion. Necropolis Fiend exiles stuff in spades and really isn't all that impressive a body for the cost, so I'm definitely cutting it. Timeless Witness was a weird one. Its ETB is good and can trigger Teval, but it's a 4 mana 2/1 that can later be a 7 mana 4/4. I cut this because I think we can just do better with the slot. And I cut Treasure Cruise for a similar reason as Necropolis Fiend. Sure, drawing 3 cards for 1 mana is a great rate, but if we're sacrificing 7 other cards out of the graveyard, that feels like a huge opportunity to just get burned down the road. I don't like this card, and I don't like it in this deck either. Woe Strider feels like it fits better with the direction Codis wants the deck to go in, but either way, I just find it to be very underwhelming. There are plenty of cards in the original 99 that make this deck feel good to pilot, but there are 5 that really stood out to me. Hedron Crab finally got a legit reprint. Who doesn't love this card? Mana dorks who can do more than be dorks are pretty sweet. Skull Prophet helps you ramp early, then can swap to filling the graveyard for your pop-off. Winning the game with this deck is kinda clunky. You just have a bunch of mana, but finding a win con usually involves lots of tokens that aren't being buffed, or a mass recursion. Wonder helps smooth that out by giving everything flying. The OG after Life from the Loam is a graveyard engine by itself. Dredge is ridiculously broken as it allows this card to basically give you infinite value as long as it's not exiled. With how much recursion this deck has, Noxious Gearhulk may as well have Death Touch. People will be scared to block it, not only because of the 5 power, but because they know you're likely to recur it and just smoke their commander if given the chance. I like the life gain element of this as well, especially if you're going up against something like a Fellothar deck. Obviously the main set will have cards perfectly crafted to slot into these precons, which is why I wanted to dedicate a section specifically to my 5 favorite cards for each color trio. When I first saw this card, I had to double check to make sure I read it right. Keru Goldkeeper is basically a budget Teval and synergizes extremely well with the plan of this deck. Sidisi takes a little bit of setup to be super impactful. You need to fill your graveyard a little bit, but it's not hard to get value with her once your graveyard has hit capacity. There are a bunch of Sultai costed cards you can add to this deck from the main set, but Death Begets Life was my favorite pie in the sky card. It helps with the abysmal card draw this deck has and can be an emergency board wipe for 8 mana. Yeah, that's nothing in this deck. There's a bunch of buzz around this card on social media, and for good reason. Not only is it gorgeous, shout out David Szabo and Kevin Glint, the modal options are all legitimate contenders for all being usable, which really doesn't happen all that often on modal cards. The last card on this list, Glacierwood Siege, is either a budget Crucible of Worlds or a constant mill option. It's worth noting there's a legitimate concern for milling yourself out with this deck. It's really good at milling straight out of the box, so I'd recommend you pick the namesake of the deck and play some lands out of your graveyard. And that's the Sultai Arisen Precon. I really enjoyed this deck after playtesting it a bunch, and I hope you feel the same if you decided to buy it. Check out my Revise of the Claw video if you want to see a Dragon Graveyard deck, and my Jeskai Strikers deck if you're still undecided on what precon to buy from Tarkir Dragonstorm. Until next time, peace.